And we're back. It is next time. We're going to keep working on this snowman who I haven't figured out, how to add snow to the top of his hat yet. So we're going to continue thinking about what it is we do and don't like and how we can fix it and other things we can manipulate. And so I think, this looks pretty good, but there are some problems. And for me, some of the problems are this, like, look, there's a bright spotlight here and here. And like, there's clearly lighting here, which maybe we think is the sun, but it doesn't look very sunny out here. And so one of the problems is that there's no like context for the lighting. Another issue I have is like, look how sharp this line is here where the snow meets. I mean, it's kind of okay, but most of the time snow is like a little bit translucent. And so we wouldn't expect these like really sharp lines. So we got to figure out what we can do about that. Also, as we add context for lighting, we're going to learn some other tricks, like the other kinds of objects we can add, how we can better handle lights, the difference between the different kinds of rendering engines that we have access to and how they treat things like lights and reflections. And then we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about the different objects that we can put in and a little bit more on nodes, or I guess starting out thinking about nodes. Okay, so let's get started. This is our scene. And I think the first thing I want to work on, I'm just going to middle mouse to get out of the camera, is this, like that sharp line. Okay, so this is going to be our very first introduction to nodes. Is going to be pretty gentle because all we need to do is modify this a little bit. So let's actually get rid of this hat too. Don't need it anymore. Okay, so here we go. How do I do this? Well, we can fix it with the materials property. So if I select this and go to the materials tab down here, then this is where we were. We started with nodes, that's sort of the default now, but we said we don't need it, but now we do. Without nodes, we have the choice of color, how metallic or like kind of reflective it is, how well it reflects, and then like how rough it is while it's reflecting. Okay, if I click, but there's like all these different choices for different kinds of behaviors. So how do we think through what to change here? Well, what we want is like this to look a little bit translucent, like lights kind of going in and bouncing around a little bit and coming back out like snow or wax or skin or whatever. And so we want the subsurface, right? Like right now we're just sort of coming off the surface, and we want it to look like it's coming off a subsurface too. And in the nodes, you have subsurface. And so if I click in here, I can like change it up and down, click off, and then click and drag to the right. And watch that line, that sharp line that we didn't like. As I pull it up, it gets kind of fuzzy and also red. And the reason it gets red is because I have three subsurface channels. They call them radii, but let's think of them as like RGB. And so RGB are all being scattered differently. Like maybe red quite a bit, whereas green and blue aren't. And so what I can do is just change all these to 1, and then they'll all scatter equally. That kind of turned to like a very light green, and then 1, and now everything scatters evenly and it's white. And as I turn the subsurface down and up, it gets sharper. And so like we can find somewhere where we think like, oh, that kind of looks a little bit like snow. If we think snow kind of looks a little blue, we can like adjust these a little bit to like, and you can see you can go above 1 and make it like super scattery. But let's not do that. Let's just, how about I make this 0.5 and I make this like 0.5 as well. And then it's got a slight like maybe blue purplish tint to it, like snow might have. All right, and we did that to the snow material. So everything that had the snow material, which is our 3 snowmen guys and this bottom thing down here, we've adjusted so that everywhere now has this like fixed problem where we used to have really sharp lines, but we don't anymore. That's problem 1 out of the way. One thing I'll note is like that this snow that we had, this like capital snow, is different from what this is. This is snow with its own material. So when we clicked on snow and made snow, right, which is inside of here, all of these actually have, every time they made it, they made their own material, so we could adjust them differently. So that's done. We don't have to worry about that anymore. Next, context for these lights. Well, I have a fill light. That's the light that's like, the key light. That's the light that's really capturing our dude here. And then we have the fill light and then these 2 edge lights. Let's think about what could be going on. Well, I got a snowman sitting around. Maybe it's like evening, and so he's hanging out underneath something like a light post, right? So why don't, I mean, like a light post just naturally casts light. So that seems like good context for this. And we know what light posts look like. They're made out of maybe some cylinders. So let's make like an old school looking light post. So I need a mesh. I want a cylinder. There it is. I probably want this cylinder to be kind of tall. So I'll go scale along Z, make it tall. It can be a little skinnier, and so I can like scale it back down this way. I could scale along X and Y, or I can just like scale the whole thing and it'll get a little bit skinnier as that happens. And then G, let's move it along Y over here somewhere. If I look down from the top, this is my key light, and so maybe I want it like here-ish, and then we can like make the cylinder that holds that light come out this way, maybe even just a little bit closer. We can adjust that later. Then we need the light to be tall, of course, the lamp post to be tall, so then we'll just move it up, and maybe it needs to be a little taller than it is, so we'll just say S along Z again, just to make it a little bit taller. Okay, move it up again. So I need just to hold a light, and maybe like the way it would do it is we'd have like a cross beam coming out, and that's also going to be another cylinder. So I'll just say like copy paste, but one second, let's think about where this cylinder went. It's like out here on its own. Maybe we'd like it, since we're going to build up a lamp post, we can make a new collection. So let's just say move to collection, new collection, and then lamp post. Is that one word or two? Lamp post? I don't know. Anyway, there's our lamps. I have an object that's inside this like collection, which means I'm sort of like working inside that collection right now. If I hit copy paste, the new option, the new thing I made is inside of the active collection. So that's something to be like aware of in case you're just adding objects and you don't know where they're going. They're going inside whatever your active collection is. Okay. If I'm looking at this, you can also see like this is the dark orange cylinder, which means like even though the copied cylinder, like what I pasted is selected, it's not the active object. And so if I want it to be active, I have to click on it. And I do because I'd like to rotate this along like the X, and I kind of want it to be like 90 degrees, but we know there's an easier way to do that, which is to come and click on this material, the object properties, and then just say, I want this rotated along the X axis by 90 degrees. So I'll just like go in here, say 90. Perfect. This is going to be like the crossbar that goes across, and it's not going to be the same size. It should be like shorter and skinnier. So let's go ahead and like skinify it first, and then we can decide exactly where we want it to be. I'm going to go G along the Y to move it, and like that's probably still, it's like maybe as wide as I want it to be in turn, like compared to this other object, but it's a little long. So how about we scale this along that Y axis. We'll just make it a little shorter. Okay. And then I'll just, like, the illusion of it being connected is just put it inside of that one, and there we go. So last step, like I have this and I have like a thing that's coming over to the side that's going to hold my light, but normally you don't just like stick a pole inside another pole, like something's holding it there. So we need some sort of thing that's going to like come across and hold it. And again, I think the easiest way maybe to do this is just copy paste, because it's going to be another cylinder, and we want it to be smaller maybe. And so I want it to be smaller, not in like the long way, but in like the short way. And so the two short ways. So let's make it like half 0.05 and then 0.05. Even though this says like Z direction, and that's no longer along the Z direction, that's okay. You see what I did? I forgot to select off. So we actually modified the one that we had copied. That's okay. Then I can go G, and I can move this up a little bit. And I need it to be like at an angle, and like the normal angle would be 30 degrees, right? Like if I want to make a 30, 60, 90 triangle. But when I look at this, its rotation was already 90, so adding 30 to that makes it 120. And now I have something that if I use it like a crossbar, I can go along Y till it meets there, and then move it up along Z, And that would be the crossbar, except this needs to be a little bit taller, so we'll scale that in Z like that. And look at this, now I have something that kind of looks like a lamppost where I could hang something off of here, like a light. All of these should be like shaded smooth, so let's just go ahead and like take care of that. These are all shade smooth, and now we have something that looks good. We got to pick a material. We had this like material for the coal that was black and shiny, so let's pretend that this is a wrought iron fence. We'll go to the materials property, or wrought iron pole, and we'll say like coal's good enough. And I need to apply it to all three. And I could do this a couple different ways. I can like go in and say coal, or I could use this like link that we saw last time, which would be Control L to apply. But that was pretty fast. Okay, now I have a post. I'm gonna look down, like it doesn't line up with this, and I could just like slide everything up there if I wanted to, but maybe I want to rotate it just so that things are a little bit more visually interesting, like this isn't pointed flat to the camera necessarily. So I want to select all three of these. But if I try to do that from here, like I'll also get the plane maybe, which I don't want. This is another place that collections come in handy. So if I take this and right click, I can just say select objects, and it'll select everything in that collection. So now I only have the three I'm interested in. I'm going to rotate that around Z, something like that looks pretty good. Then I'm going to just move this so that maybe right where the crossbar, or like that diagonal support comes down, is where our light is. Okay, cool. So that looks pretty good. Now we're ready for a light. What could that light look like? Well, there's a couple different styles of lamps, but I think one of them, a simple one, because I don't need to spend forever on this, is just like a shade that looks like a triangle, okay? Or a cone, I guess one would say. So how about Control A, and then we will add a mesh, and that mesh will be a cone. And that's good enough, like that's all we really need. So I'll take that cone and I will move it along Y, and then, well, let's look down, because we know where we want to position this actually. And so I'm just going to pan over and then say G and move it right underneath here. And then I can look back on the front or the side, I guess, like how about there? Well, I still can't see it. Yeah, that's maybe as good as we're going to get. GZ, and then I'll move it up to right here. Something that's kind of interesting is like, look, it's blocking the light, and we'll talk about that in a moment. This is like too sharp a cone though, like maybe I want a flatter cone for this shade, and so we'll just scale this. You know, we know how to do many of these things. Again, like it's distance from that center point, so I could go up and down to scale, but it's distance from the center point that controls it. So that looks pretty good for a shade. GZ, I'll move it up here. Our light disappeared, right? It kind of covers the light. So we could do something like pick the light and just move it down slightly, like that, and then I can see everything again. This needs to be a material. I think why not make it coal? All right, and then we'll shade that smooth. Good, so I have this lamp. I can move it down even more so that we don't have that like weird artifact up there. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit, but I need a light here. Of course, this isn't really even what a lamp looks like. Like if I look in here, I see this bright spot, which is fine, but it's really just a reflection off of that shade. And in like a real lamp, what you would have is like a bulb, right? And the bulb would be bright, and that'd be the thing that's kind of glowing. And so let's add a bulb. Well, you might think like, I know how to add a bulb. Like I'll go like Shift A, and then we'll do mesh, and we'll do like either a UV or an icososphere, but not this time. I think just for fun, we're going to use something else, and also we're going to need to know about them when it comes to doing molecules, and so we'll look at the surfaces. And so surfaces, another name for them here is NURBS, which I don't even know what it stands for, but we want a sphere, so let's get a NURB sphere. Now we've created a NURB sphere over here. I can just like G, Y, move it over. I guess we can do the same thing that we did before, which is like look down from the top, and that makes our life like really easy for trying to align this with the lamp. And then we can also go here and go GZ and move it up. It's going to block the light, which maybe we don't want, and we'll talk about how to handle that in just a second. But this is too big anyway for a bulb, because a bulb needs to be like GZ, like that might be a good size, if we want like something that's round, we could also like think about how like sometimes they're like not perfectly round, like there's really like a light casing, you know what I mean? And it might be like a little squished. So let's even scale this in the Z a little bit, just like we would with anything else to make it more squished. And then if I go GZ and put it up here like that, now it starts to look a little bit more like that light encasing, and I can maybe scale it up a little bit because yeah, that looks pretty reasonable. I'll go GZ just a little bit more. Okay, so we've got this. We've got a problem because like there's a light in there and the light's blocked, and we can move the light down again, but like maybe that's not exactly what we want. If I go to our lights collection, this is our key light, and I go GZ, and I'm just like lowering it again, but like it's also going to cast a shadow on this round thing, which causes us a problem because like that's the thing that's bright, okay, is that thing. So how can I handle this? Well, the thing that you want to do is you want to control its behaviors in terms of whether it casts a shadow or not. So we should give this a new material, I guess, as well. So let's call this our light. Bulb? Maybe bulb's a better name for it. I don't know. Since there's other things called light, that'll just be easier to find it this way. And like this thing corresponds to like a color that's kind of like a nice yellowish color. So let's also like kind of take care of the fact that this is a nice yellowish color, and maybe like making it a little bit dusty would help. There we go. That looks pretty good to me. Something else that's under the settings menu, then you can see shadow mode. It says opaque. I will say none. And look what just happened. It kind of like opened up this, and it's like this bulb is no longer casting a shadow. And so if I go ahead and move this GZ up, look at that. It no longer blocks the light like this lamp used to, or like the shade for the lamp used to. It can be inside of here, and everything's just fine. Okay, good. So what else? It still doesn't quite look right because like what's happening is that the light's lighting up certain parts of this and not anything else. So if I go back to this in the materials tab, I have emission. And emission will make things look bright. So if I like go like this, whoops, and there we go, scale this up, you can see it looks like bright and glowy now. And this emission strength is kind of what like controls that, right? So make it like super bright. But 1's probably good enough for right now for us. We can adjust it later if we want. It's like white because it's emitting white light, but really what we want to do is have it emit like a light that's similar in color to what we had. So I can like move this around and like, oh, that looks all right. You know, again, there's a way to like assign these exact colors if you want, but I think for what we're doing here, this is good enough. Okay, so now I have something that looks like it's light, and now maybe I do want it a little bit brighter. So like what happens if I crank this to 10? Now it's starting to look like pretty bright. And you think like, oh, that's emitting. That's interesting. Like maybe I don't need the light. Huh. Well, let's think about that. So let's take a moment and render this now that we have this light. So render image. Again, this is going to take just like a little while. I have this, the fill lights like shining on here. And in fact, let's make our life as easy as possible to understand. We're thinking about the key light right now. So let's turn off all these other lights. Okay, and that fills this up. And so if I render this, which is F12, there it is. We have a light casting a shadow. You think like, oh, the material is emitting, so maybe we don't need this key light. And if I turn off in the viewport, you'll see it's like a problem because what is emitting doesn't really emit light. And like also then if I turn it off in the render, you'll see that when there's no light is being emitted. Even though this is supposed to look like it's emitting light, it's really not. But that is a function of Eevee. So if I don't change anything, but click on this camera tab here, which is the render properties, and change my render engine from Eevee to cycles, now look, this is actually casting some light. And then I can go back to its materials properties, and let's actually turn it up even more. How about 20? Just so it's like abundantly clear that we're going to have some emission. I think we could go even brighter. Okay, And then now I can do F12. And what's happening is that in like cycles, it's a ray tracing thing. And so it knows what is emitting light and what light is bouncing off of what. It's following like these photon paths. And so if I hit F12, you'll actually see my computer build this up. I'll move it over as it's like analyzing where the light is coming from and going to in each one of these squares. And there's a square for each one of the processors in my CPU because I'm using CPU rendering. And so that's what it's doing. And because this is emitting light and cycles can follow photons, it sees this light. But I'm going to just quit out of this. If we go back and go to Eevee, we'll see that is missing. So if we're going to do this in Eevee, which I think we might as well, then we need to turn our key light back on so that we have the lighting here. What else do we want to do? I think it might be nice, like when I think about street lamps, I'm oftentimes thinking about like how you can see a beam of light coming out of that street lamp, and that looks neat. And so why do we see those beams of light? It's because there's dust particles in the air, and the light is like bouncing off the dust particle and then coming to see us. So we need something that's going to scatter light inside the volume of this thing. And there's a couple different ways we could do this. I think like for right now, we might change this later, but let's just go to this tab here. It looks a lot like the materials tab, but it's the world tab. What we want is to put like something in the volume of the world that will scatter light. So under volume, right now there's nothing. I'll click on that and say I want a volume scatter. Now like everything gets kind of dark and hazy because there's like a lot of dust. That's like the default. And so we want to turn the density down somewhat on this. We don't want quite so many things per unit area. So there's 0.1, starting to be able to see things, and already you can see like the light scattering. That's kind of nice. How about 0.01? Go down another 10. Maybe that could work. How about if it was like 0.02? Yeah, we'll try that. We might come back and change it later. While we're here though, let's also think about like the world out here, which is like, why does it have the color it has? So actually, let's remove this for a moment. Out here, like the world's gray, and the reason it's gray, we talked about this a little bit in group meetings, is because the whole world is emitting a color. And the color it is emitting is that gray. And so what I could do is change this if I want. Now, it's nighttime, right? And the nighttime world is kind of this like purpley blue. And so how about we pick something that's like over here that makes it look purpley blue, and it's like pretty light. And there's a couple things we could do. We could like turn down the intensity if we want, but I think another thing is like it's just like a little too saturated. So rather than turning this density down to begin with, I think in the color we just mute it a little bit by adding a little bit of black back in till it starts to look a little bit just slightly purple, that nice dusk color. I think that actually looks pretty nice, so we don't have to adjust the strength. We'll go back to the volume scatter, and then I think we had decided that 0.02 was a pretty good, like 0.023, that's going to be too much. That looks pretty good. We can't really see the purple except in the places where the light doesn't reach, right? Because the scatter screens out everything that's too far away. But in these like dark areas and then in the shadows, we get that purple color because that's kind of what the color that the whole world is emitting for us. So that's a nice effect. Okay, we have this here, and we have a light, and it is kind of giving us like scattered rays, right? If I tilt up here, you'll really see it. But what's happening is like I have a light bulb, and it's like going like this, and then it's only getting blocked here, and like, okay, yeah, that is kind of how these work, but I kind of want more a look of like a cone of light coming down. And there's a couple ways you could try to achieve this. One is to like select this light, this key light, and move it up, and then eventually like you'll bring this down. But really, it's hard to like position it exactly where you want, and then it like doesn't cast enough light off to the side. And so we want the light to be inside this like bulb casing. We just want the light to be directed down, almost like a spotlight. So with this key light selected, which we did have before, you go to this, which is the object data properties, but for a light, and so it's got a light bulb. And right now it's a point source, but we would like it to be a spotlight. And look at that. So if I am here, I could try to like move this around because I want it to shine straight down. But an easier way is just to go to this materials tab and then change all these rotations to 0. and we'll just have this like point, have this pointed straight down, and then this, okay, 0. And now I have a spotlight pointed down. It's like not wide enough to capture the snowman, but we can go back to this light bulb tab and we can just change things like, this says size 75 degrees. Size is kind of a weird term, but if I like scale it up, look at that. Okay, so then we just like scale it up until it covers his head. Let's say something like that. And now the light is like really directed like down, like I kind of wanted it to be. Of course, we could have like a narrower cone if we moved everything over a little bit. And so let's just like look down here and decide like, do we want to do that? Well, I have this key light, I have these lamps, like that is now part of this lamp. So let's just move everything in there. And then let's select objects and I can go G. Oh, here's something this is the first time we're seeing it actually, because I'm usually more careful. If I have my cursor somewhere that's not inside of the layout and I use a hotkey, it doesn't do anything. I have to be inside this layout. Then when I press G, I can move things around. So how about something more like that? And now if I look to the side, maybe I can get a slightly narrower cone on this for a more dramatic decrease in how this key light is pushing down onto this snow person, like that. Okay. What else do we have? Oh, we have blend. I guess we could have talked about that. Let's see what, if I do this, you can see it moves that inner light. It's hard to tell right now. So we're at 158 degrees. So let's go back to something small, like 90, where you can see like sharp edges on the ground. And if I change blend, it sharpens up that edge. Can you see that? And so blend is like how soft the edges are going to be. So maybe something like that is good, but we don't notice it as much when the cone is wide because it like spreads out. But this inner and outer is like how the distance over which the light sort of fades and has this soft edge to it. What is next? We've added context for this light here, but that isn't context for the fill light. So we have the key light explained, but now if I go back and I turn on the fill light, we've got a problem, which is like if I look at where that fill light is, it's like it's almost just some spot that's glowing there, right? Like, and if I look through the camera and I render this, then what I see in my render is I have this like street lamp, and I can be like, yeah, that's why there's this key light, is like there's something shining here. But I have this fill light and it's just floating there. Like nothing, like there shouldn't be a reason. It's especially a problem because we have these dust particles now that scatter, and I can see that it's there. And so what do I do about this? Well, there's a lot of different things that one could try, but I think like there's like a floating point. So things that float around and seem like magical, like this landscape, are fairies. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's build one up. It also gives us a chance to learn about a new thing that's going to be interesting for us, which is the meta ball. So let's add a meta ball, and I guess I'll pan so we can see it because we're going to build it over here. Here it is. I'll move it up. We're going to want our fairy to be small so I can shrink this down. But before I do that, like look at this. There's like two circles. There's like the circle of the meta ball, and then there's like this other circle around the meta ball. Like what's that for? Don't worry. We'll see in a moment. We don't need to see like hardly anything. Like everything here is just sort of a confusing problem for us right now. So let's go ahead and just like get rid of the snowman. Let's get rid of the lights. Let's get rid of this collection. And now all we have is a meta ball floating around with meta ball, ellipsoid, G, Z. I'm going to move it up and like, oh. But what meta balls do is when they start to overlap, they join together like this. And so is this going to be like super useful for us here? No, but I want to play with them anyway so you see it. But if we had like a bunch of atoms with electrons spread out over them and we wanted to visualize it somehow like in a molecule, this could be a nice way to do that. Okay, but I think we want the same sort of thing. So let's just scale this out in X so that it's long. Let's also scale it in the Y so it's like a little bit more narrow. Then let's rotate this in the Y, I guess, would be like this. And then rotate in the Z a little bit, rotate in the X. that'll give us something like that. And then I can put GZ, GY, GZ. Yeah, something like that's starting to look okay, right? As like part of a wing. How about G rotate and X again, I think. I just want U. Okay. G, R, and the X. R and the Z, and yeah, that looks pretty good. And we could even like select the ball so you can kind of see what's going on. Is like it thinks it's connected, but we're modifying the ball because we have this around here. So I can scale that just to be a little bit bigger. How about we get the ellipsoid R along X, and we'll just tilt it a little bit more. G along Y. There we go. I like that. That looks a little bit like a fairy. I might even be able to like rotate it on X and flatten it out just a little bit more. GZ. Yeah, okay. And so all I want to do now is take this and like reflect it if I could, so that I have another one of these. G along the Y. Maybe I don't want it to look like totally perfect like it's reflected, so let's go and do it manually. It won't take us too long. So now I have that, and yeah, that looks pretty good. I can like also rotate it along Y just a little bit to like give it a little bit of a different feel. Yeah, that kind of looks to me like a fairy. Got like wings and stuff like that, and it's like a little bumpy, but you know, we're playing around, so we're not going to worry about it too much. You might think like, oh, it's bumpy, I kind of know what to do, like let's like subdivide this, or let's like shade smooth it, and then you go, oh, where did this shade smooth go? Well, it's not an option for these meta balls. So instead what you need to do is right click and say convert to mesh. And before we do that, let's have a look at what it looks like in the wireframe. All right, I guess I don't need the snow anymore. So there's the wireframe. I have 3 objects, a meta ball and 2 meta like ellipses that we used. And then I want to like pick all 3 of them. And then I want to click on them and say convert to mesh. And now I have one object. And now if I look at this object, I could select it and say shade smooth, which solves some of our problems, but not all of them. It kind of looks funky, but remember that if I put like all this stuff back, I now have like this giant fairy, and it needs to be small. So you know what? It's going to be like tiny, and then I'm not going to even notice really that it's like jagged. Okay, so let's look down from the top. Let's select our fairy. Let's move him or her over here, and then G down onto the light, and then the same sort of thing. Like I want this to like be a fairy. If I turn into the render mode, it's going to be like casting a shadow, which I don't want. In fact, the light's in there, so I can't even see it. So what I want to do is go metaball. I would like to give you a material which we had already created, which was fairy, and now the light can come out. The fairy is not like a great color, so you know, this light was kind of a pale blue, so let's make the fairy kind of like a pale blue. And something else that's kind of nice is like we have a carrot and it's orange. And then we have a night sky. So we're like here, a night sky that's blue, kind of purple. And so guess what? Like split complementary is going to give us a color up here somewhere. Now I can't see it because like the light still is like casting shadows on itself, which I said we didn't need to worry about. And the reason we don't need to worry about it is because we're just going to make this thing emit. And then I'm not going to see those shadows. We're going to just overpower them. So there's this like fairy. It's like kind of crazy color right now. And so that's like a little too much of that color, I think. So we're just going to like tone it down just ever so much. And now it's kind of interesting because the shadows do appear, but they add just a little bit of texture instead. And so that could be like a nice way to enjoy the fact that your object is a little bumpy, is that you are letting that bumpiness give it some interesting texture. And then we can decide like exactly how bright we want this to be. Oh, that looks pretty good. Yeah, little glowy fairy. Okay, so what else do we want to do here? I think like we still have the problem of these two edge lights needing context, and I don't know, we could come up with some other reason, like maybe there's a fire or something like that, but maybe instead of that, we just decide we want a 3-point lighting system. I don't need this, so now I just have to like come up with the context for only this edge light. And I have the context for like a fill light, but what if this fill light was somehow long? Like there was a whole bunch of these like spread out, like there's a bunch of fairies. And then I would have lighting on the back and lighting on the front as well. And so that's something we could do. This meta ball, I'm going to name it Fairy, just so we know. I'm also going to give us a new collection that I'm going to call Fairy. And then I'm going to put this fairy inside of that fairy, and this edge light here that we can still see that we want to include, or that we're going to want to like account for, we don't need, but the fill light is the one that's under the fairy. So let's call this fairy light. And we'll put that in here. So now I have a collection that is all the fairy stuff. It's like the fairy object and the fairy light. And then what I could do is like copy each one of these and move them around and stuff like that. But then I'd want to like, they're not flying in like a perfect formation, so I need to like copy them and like tilt each one a little bit, and then also like maybe like make them slightly different sizes. I don't know if all fairies are the same size, but it might look more interesting. And so that sounds like a pain. And what we can do instead of that is use nodes. So the last thing we're going to do in this video is get a real proper introduction to nodes. So far, this is what you know of nodes. I click on materials and there's like this. Well, there's so much more. Okay, so if you are here, you can see like down to this little bit, there's like kind of corners that meet, and you get this cursor, and then if you're right in the middle, you get this plus mark. And I would also get that plus mark if I tried hard enough, like up here. I'd get it up over here, where anywhere that these like rounded corners meet. So what we can do is we can grab one of those and drag up. And now there's a new window. And we can look at what else might be in this window. We kind of know that like, okay, I could change this to be like wire, and now I'm like seeing both of these things, right? Or I could like go to edit mode if I wanted to, but it changes edit mode up there because we can't, like, it would be weird to be in edit mode in one place and not the other. But there's even more. All right, I can click here, editor type. And right now we're in like the layout editor. And we don't, or what they call the 3D viewport editor. We would like to edit nodes. And in particular, we don't want to edit like shader nodes and stuff like that, which would be here. We want to use nodes to edit our geometries, or like these shapes that we have. So I'm going to click Geometry Editor Node. And then we get this like whole thing here that's blank. And the reason it's blank is because we haven't added anything yet. And what we're going to do is we're going to use nodes to like put these fairies at different points along like a geometry. So let's think for just a second that like maybe what I want is like a cloud of fairies, right? But not like just a ball of fairies. Maybe because I want the light to spread from like over here to over here, it'd be nice if we had like an elongated shape. And we've already seen something kind of like that actually. And so what if in this viewpoint here, or viewport here, I added something that would look like that. So I have a mesh, I have this like icososphere, that could work actually. A cylinder, a cone, a torus. I have like a meta ball. I could take this ellipsoid and convert it to a mesh or something like that. But let's try this icosphere. That might be fun actually. And let's like change the symmetry to be just a little bit higher. All right. There's my icosphere. I'm going to just move it up so I can kind of like put it at the right height here. G, Z. It's like already in the right position. I'd like it to be spread out along the X quite a bit so that we get like light in the front and light in the back a little bit. Maybe overall it might be nice actually if it's like either more in the front or more in the back. I don't know. Let's try that. That might be fun. And then what I want to do is I want to somehow use this mesh object to tell me where I might place a bunch of these fairies. So, new. When I press new, I'm going to get geometry. I can zoom in and out. I can like hold down the mouse to pan. This is the middle mouse button. I can drag to select. I can click to select. Something that's different is I don't have to press G anymore. I can just drag this around if I want. Okay. What's happening is that I'm taking this geometry input and I'm turning it directly into the geometry output, which is the same thing, like nothing happened. What we would like to do is take that geometry and define a bunch of points. And so just like if we were up here in this window, I could say Control A to add something. We want to add points. We want to distribute them. And so we're going to add it the hard way first, which is like just like, I'm going to add it up here for a second and think about what's going on. So I said geometry in, geometry out. So this geometry in is now going to go into this geometry. And then the geometry of these points is going to go out, and that's our output. And this line disappears. And now we just have a series of points, because what I've done is I've taken the geometry and I've assigned a bunch of points to it, and then I outputted that. Now what we want to do is turn those points into this fairy. And the way to do that is to do what they call an instance. So we're going to point instance. Now we're going to do this the easy way. You'll notice like if I run this into this like line, it turns white. And when it's white, if I just click, it automatically adds it. And then what I'm trying to do is it's saying like, oh, add an object. Sure, we want this fairy. I'll just like go click fairy. And now I have a bunch of fairies distributed. It looks crazy and we're not going to have to worry about it because we really don't just want the fairy, right? Wouldn't it be nice is if instead of just the fairy, we had the fairy with its light. And those are both inside of a collection. So I can click on collection. I can click here and I can say I want the fairy. And now I have a bunch of fairies distributed around, sort of following where those points were. All right, the scale's changed a little bit. That's fine. We'll worry about that later. And each one of them has a light associated with it, which is kind of what we wanted. Now, things are a little crazy because like stuff's oriented kind of all over the place. And so maybe we want to make them all like at least standing up straight. And the way to do that is to control the vector on which they're aligned. So if I say Control A, point, align rotation to vector, and drop that in, now they're like all aligned along the X. That's not what we want. We want them standing up, so along the Z. And now I kind of have this like, if I go up top, look, I kind of have a ring. But what's happening is like, kind of like flying around in a circle, and I don't know, that maybe that's because like they're at points at the end and then they're facing kind of weird ways, and when they're in the middle maybe it's a little bit better. There's a couple things we could try to do to solve this, and let's see what we can do. First is we can say like part of it is that there's a random seed to where these points are. So maybe if I just click on this seed a couple times, it still doesn't really solve this problem. So I think the major issue happens at the corners. In the middle, things are generally facing the right way. So why don't we just cut off those corners, like those edge parts? And so to do that, we want to see this again. So like what happens if I break this and then just send it straight over to geometry? Now I have this ellipse back. Okay. So now I have the ellipse. I don't want the endpoints. We know how to solve that. I go to edit mode. And then inside this edit mode, I just get rid of the edge points. I'll go to wireframe so that I don't have to worry about things like getting in the way of my view. I'll select like the endpoints, hit delete. When I hit delete, it'll give me an option. I want the vertices gone. I don't worry about the faces in this case because that's fine. And then delete vertices. I don't have those edge, like the very corners up and down here. And so let's just plug this back in how we want. This goes to here, and then my output goes to the geometry. And then let's have a look. Still have some problems, but maybe now the seeds will do a slightly better job. Like now it kind of looks like they're maybe flying around on like a path, especially if I'm looking kind of like down the edge. Doesn't it kind of like look like they're wrapping around a little bit? Yeah, I kind of like that. Okay, so what else can I do? Well, I I can take like this geometry that we have now that's like all these different lamps, and I can just kind of move it around the way I normally would. That's kind of interesting. GX, so I can like line it up so it looks like they're all flying together, and then they're too high, so how about GZ, and we bring it down, and now they're lined up with this. I could keep this here or not, but I think it's kind of nice. And now I have something off in the background in the distance. They're flying over this hill. And maybe what I want to do then is really take this fairy collection and move it so that it's like, this is the point one of the points I wanted to make, which is like the nodes are tied to this original instance. So I can't really like change some things separately. All right, so I have to change these. And you'll notice when I select one of them, I select them all. So if I wanted to change like their materials somehow, I'd have to change them all. All right, so let me just make this a little bit lower. I can't go much lower than that, I don't think. That looks pretty good. Now, a question might be like, are all these fairies like exactly the same? Or maybe they should like be, some of them are a little brighter, or some of them are a little bigger, or something like that. And so we could add in like a randomization if we wanted to. And the way to do that is to like make a attribute that's randomized. So I can put this in, and then we have to say what attribute, and it doesn't show up here, which is sort of like, I think the nodes are evolving and how user-friendly they are. But if we're thinking about size, we're thinking about scale. So we can just type that in. And it did move things around just a little bit, and you'll notice like some things are really tiny now and some things are really big, and that's because like the minimum scale that we can have is 0. So like let's just like scale that right back up. So how about the minimum scale is like 0.9 and the maximum is 0.1. So now some things are a little bit bigger, some things are a little bit smaller, but not like vastly different. Good. What else? Anything here? I think like maybe the last point I want to make about nodes is as follows. Nodes are really part of the modifier. And so we can like add multiple modifiers if we want. Like one that we've already known is like displace. So if I put in displace, look what it did. It like made these things crazy, and like, you know, we could like tie it to a texture, and that texture could still be if we wanted clouds. And now I have these like lightning bats of fairies if you want. I guess that's kind of cool. But what's happening is in the modifying end of things, what we're doing is we are getting instances of this fairy, and then we're modifying it, right? We're getting geometry nodes to instance it, which is what's happening like up here. But then afterwards we're displacing it, which is what's happening down here. And what if instead we can drag over here on the right, click and drag, we just put it first. So now we're going to displace the surface, and then we're going to turn that into something that we modify. And look, like things have moved around because we have a displacement of the surface that is tied to the displacement. And then once we've displaced that surface, we have, according to the clouds, we've then assigned points to that displaced surface. So that's what's going on here. And so then we could like have fun and say, kind of use that to like position these even a little bit more if we wanted. Something like that maybe. And so now we have something that looks even more like things flying around. I don't know. And so now we have nodes, and they're part of this like modifier window. Something to notice is like if I click on geometry node, like where did it go here? I have to click here to have it show up. And so there's like a million other things you can do with nodes. We're just like reaching the little point. But the thing I want that's like maybe important to realize, not only like that this is powerful and you can have fun and play around with it some, is that like this is its own thing, and then these are like instances that you can't alter one at a time. They're all sort of collected together, and they're associated with, like when I select them, I select this icososphere, right? And so this is like the cloned fairies, really, the way that we've set this up. And so I have to like deal with all of them on their own. And then like inside here, we have these like modifiers, and there's my geometry nodes happening after the displacement. So it's like one object, but being represented multiple times. So that's something to like be aware of. Okay. If we're done with this like node window for a second, let's just get everything back. Oh, geez. Yeah, I forgot about that. Okay, there we go. So we're ready to render. F12. Let's see what this looks like. I think we'll make one more change, or maybe two. One thing you can see is like, maybe this is a little bright. Oh, I can still see this, which I don't need anymore in the background, although it's kind of maybe hard to distinguish between these guys. So let's get rid of the render, and let's think about what we might do to make this a little bit better. Let's look through here and see what we're seeing. Like, to me, these fairies seem a little big. So what if I like take this and scale it down? Look, they all scale, because again, they're all tied together. And so I'm going to just drop these fairies down to be a little bit smaller. I'm going to take this edge light and I'm going to, oh, okay, I can't see it here, and it is gone from the render, so that's good. What else? Something that I think is a neat effect is like this light that's in the fairy is like buried within here, but what if we brought it just a little bit forward for us? So I put GX and just, you'll see all of them move now. And now it looks like the head of these things is lit up. And we can see if we think that looks good. And what you'll see is like, look, all of these are actually facing, now we can see, the wrong way, which is kind of interesting. So what if I pick this and I go rotate along the Z? Whoops. Well, in fact, we know a better way to do this is Z rotation 180. Let's look back down at the top. Got to make sure I'm in the 3D layout. And now all the like lights are kind of at the front. And so we actually had them running the wrong way, didn't we? That's kind of cool. So now now the story changes ever so slightly in terms of how the flight pattern goes. Now they're coming up over the hill and then maybe flying past this guy. And we don't get as much of an edge light anymore, but maybe that's still an interesting story that we can tell ourselves. And so let's just do a few more things. Let's go G. Let's see. That's starting to bury in the... So, right, that's about as good as tight as we're going to get it. And then what if I take my original fairy? Should have moved it first, as you'll see. All right, so I want to put it a little bit forward now. And then I want to select this. There we go. Something like that. Then let's look through this camera. Yeah, now we have some like fairies that are coming in and flying past this. That looks all right. We can decide whether we think we have enough light or whether we need to turn it up, because again, if I affect this light, I'm going to affect them all. So what if instead of 200 watts, it was 400? It's too bright, obviously. And then what if it's 300? It's maybe still a little too bright. So what if it's 250? Cool. That seems all right. I think the only other thing I might do is turn this camera ever so slightly to capture it all. So I'm just going to do this the cheap way. I'm going to go RZ and then just like turn it a little bit so that I can see everything. Like that. That looks all right. Let's render that. There we go. And now we have some fairies flying in. All right, great. Well, that's all. And next time, I think what we're going to do is we're going to explore a little bit more about how to like render better, control the resolution, the depth of field, and things like that in our final render.